Welcome to Kevin's European Garage, and today is going to be part 2 of how to install coilovers on my 1999 Porsche 996. Okay, so in my last video, I had installed the front coilovers and I ran into a couple problems. And so I did end up getting a new steering rack. So I do have a new steering rack for the car, and I'm going to put that in later. That's going to be a separate video all by itself. But so today we're just going to be putting in the rear coilovers. We're just going to finish those up, and then we're going to go over on how to do the preload on the springs and also do the final adjustment on this. So let's get started. Alright, so now you got the car up in the air, you got the wheels, at least the one wheel off right now. The other thing is, before you're going to have to take it apart the rear, you're going to have to jack up both sides, take both wheels off, and disconnect the sway bar link from both sides at the same time. It becomes difficult with the suspension is loaded to actually try to connect up the sway bar link afterwards, or take one off at a time and try to connect up the other one. So just take, jack up the whole car, disconnect both sway bar links at once, and it's just right inside here. Put a little PV blaster on it. So 17 millimeter, and you just have to slowly work your way out with this. It just takes a little while. Luckily mine wasn't frozen. Alright, so the next one we're going to do is this over here. Okay, so take this bolt off. It's a 16 and an 18. Alright, I like to give it just a little tap with a brass hammer and a punch to get the bolt out. So it's got pressure on it, so now my punch is in there, so I'm just gonna have to push down the suspension to pull it out. Or maybe not. It looks like you can't push down on it. I have to pry. There we go. So now I have everything disconnected on the bottom. Now we should go up into the top. All right, so now we're inside, and we're gonna have to take this cover off. And it's pretty easy. You just lift it up, just pull out. It's just foam with some carpet cover in it. Comes right out. And that gives you access to your 3 bolts that hold the strut or shock into the car. All right, so now we're going to take off these 3 15 millimeter nuts that hold the strut on. The strut's not going to fall out of the car because it's being held up by the suspension. Right extension. It's not gonna make it happen. All right, so now back to the bottom of the car. So like I said, the suspension loads this thing up, so we're just gonna have to pry on this in order to get it out. And this won't be a problem putting in the coilover. You won't have to worry about this. Down and get more than enough room to get it out. All right, and now it's time to put the strut in with the coilover. And I'm just going to push it over here. The tension on it just holds it up in place. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back into the car and put the 3 nuts on the top. All right, so now I got the strut in, and we got the new nuts to put on here, and these are 14 millimeter. The factory ones are 15. Alright, these things get torqued down to 46 Newton meters, which is also 33 foot-pounds. That one's really tight. I'm just going to loosen up and retorque it. And that's it. I'm not going to put the cover back on because we do have adjustments on here for as far as how stiff we want it to go. And normally what we're going to do is we're going to set these to 15 all the way around, and that's what that is what Feals recommends, to put it pretty much right in the middle and start from there. Okay, so now we go back down to the bottom of the car. We finish connected the rest of the coilover. All right, so now that we're back underneath the car over here, now I'm going to put the bolt in where it goes into the knuckle. Just going to kind of have to lift up the suspension. I don't know how to get it in there. So there, it's in. So now we can talk about how the adjustment works on this. Okay, so the setup on this coilover is pretty basic, and it's the same thing for the front and rear. So in order to adjust the preload on this spring, this is not a progressive rate spring or anything like that. So we need to adjust the preload on it. This one came from Feals, actually set up. So basically what we're gonna do, if you had to do it, this is what you end up doing. And this is how I did the front one also for setting up the preload. So the first thing I did is I loosened both these collars up so they were loose and the spring was flopping around. And then what I did is I tightened this collar up, putting pressure on the spring until I started lifting up the spring, and I tightened this thing up until I couldn't move the spring up anymore from the collar. Then my next thing that I did is I took this lower collar and I spun it all the way up to this. And after reading around online, I saw a lot of people that were putting in about 4 millimeters of about preload, which ends up being the thickness of the spanner that you have to adjust these. So here's the spanner, this is the thickness. So what I end up doing is that now I tighten this thing up and raise it up until I can get this in between the two of them after leaving this one stationary. Once I was able to do that, then I tighten this thing up, and then you're gonna lower down the car, and we'll get to that next step after we get the rest of it done over here. So the bottom over here, for actually adjusting the height, Feals recommends that you only have about 20 millimeters minimum inside the body over here, down on the bottom. I don't think you can see it. There you go. So on the body over here. So what I did is I set that as my maximum height. I wanted to see how that was going to be. And then once I lowered the car down, I realized that was way too high. But what's nice about this is because there's already tension on the spring and this thing's already preloaded, this thing, no matter how this is adjusted, this is always compresses the same. So what I did over here is I just measured how much I wanted to lower the car by. And that got me really, really close, and I maybe had to make a slight little bit of adjustment on the other side. So I ended up coming out with about 3 inches between here to here as far as how much of a space that we want. Now this is just for the Feal coilovers, and your car might be slightly different, but this would get you a good starting point, and that's how I ended up doing it. So I ended up getting about 3 inches, and once I did that, then I lowered the car down to the ground again and I checked it. But I didn't tighten down the bolt over here at the bottom. I just left it in place because in order to make any adjustments on this, you have to free this thing up, push this thing back a little bit, spin the bottom part of the strut in order to make any adjustment. You can't make anything here. This is pretty much stationary. This doesn't spin. So it's just this bottom part. So I only left it on here. I didn't put any nut on here just so I can get the adjustment right. So now that we got this thing in, we got it set up, I'm gonna put the tire back on, and we're gonna lower it down the ground, and we're gonna check the height, make sure it's kind of where I want, and then we're gonna double check for the preload on the spring, what they call droop, and make sure that we have the recommended minimum of 1.5. And I don't see us getting any more out of it, because in order to adjust to get more droop out of this thing, you have to lower this down, and these springs are not very tight already. So I think where they're going to be this is where it's going to be. And as long as you have about 1.5 inches of suspension travel between when the car is lowered to the car is up off the ground, we should be good. And we're going to double check that next. Okay, so now we get the car on the ground. I'm just gonna roll it back and forth a little bit just to make sure this thing is settled. I found the horn. All right, now that we rolled it back and forth, we're just gonna double check on the height. We're gonna see what we got. And I wanted to be about 2.5 inches. I'm just under 2 1/4, so I gotta raise this side up a little bit. So we're gonna jack the seam back up, and we're gonna make the adjustment. And also, before we do that, we're also gonna check to see how much preload that we have in the spring and what we're gonna actually call droop. So what we wanna do is first we're gonna take a measurement with the car on the ground, measure from here to the center of the wheel. The way I do it is like this. So I'm at approximately 13 inches at the center of the wheel right now. So let's jack up the car. Normally, you would have to jack up both sides, but I don't have the sway bar link connected for good reason, and so we can just kind of jack up this one side and make this adjustment on the one side. And now that I got the wheel up off the ground, we can check for the rest of our preload. And I have 14.5. So with this thing jacked up, we gained 1.5 inches, and that's where it's gonna stay. And they recommend anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 1/4 inches. And I don't think we can even try to increase the droop, which will lower the wheel down. If you wanted to do that, you would just have to take the spanners that you have on for the spring, loosen them up, and actually lower it down, and that will drop the spring down. But the problem with that is that you want to have pressure on the spring, and you don't want the spring to flop around. I mean, these things aren't very. You got about 4 to 6 millimeters or so of play, and it's just not worth it to try to actually get out just a little bit more. You're not going to increase it that much. So 1.5 is their minimum, and I think on this car 1.5 is pretty much right where it's supposed to be. So we're going to leave that part alone. And now the next part is that we have to increase the height of this over here, because we're a little on the low side. Like I said, about 25 1/4 inches, and I want to be 25.5. So now I'm going to pull the tire off, and I will show you how to adjust for the height. Okay, so now let's make these adjustments on here. But first, before I do anything, I just want to make sure that I actually tighten this thing up really good. I had it on the bench before. I just want to make sure now it's really tightened up well. So just, yeah, so that's done pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to loosen this up. All right, and now we're going to take the bolt out. So now what you want to do is you want to add in approximately 1/4 inch. In order to measure that, I got my caliper over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to see what we got right now. And I measured this thing out because I knew it was about 3 inches before. And now we're going to measure it out to be about 3 1/4 inches. So let's see where we're at. All right, so we got a little ways to go. So let's make the adjustment. So you're going to have to push this thing back. And then loosen it and spin it like this. So make about 3 turns, and we'll check it. Yeah, we're not quite there yet, so make a couple more turns. So let's make 2 more turns. And we're pretty much right there. So now, put the bolt back in. Tighten down the collar. I'm not cranking down on it completely yet because we still might have to make more adjustments. All right, so now I'll put the wheel back on and we'll check the ride height. Okay, so we're back on the ground. And now I'm just going to roll the car back and forth just to settle the spring. And now let's take the measurement. I am a 1/16 of an inch under 25.5. So I'm going to leave it because that's fine with me. I mean, it doesn't have to be that perfect, but that's it right there. So now the next thing you got to do is you got to put on the sway bar link, tighten up that rear bolt on the bottom. So this is how you adjust the rear. And the front is pretty much exactly the same way. Before, the car was too low, so every single time I went over a bump, I was bottoming out. My tires were rubbing. You can see the line for where they were rubbing. And I just wanted to kind of raise the car up a little bit, make it a little bit more friendly while driving around. And if it ends up being just fine, maybe I'll lower it down another 1/4 inch in the future. And also going to see what the car is like after it settles. So it might be I might be changing this again or readjusting the height in a little while after the car is settled and I've been driving around for a little bit and it's had some time to get settled up there. So now we're going to put in that bottom bolt and connect up the sway bars. All right, now make sure that that this is really tight down over here. (16 and 18). Now with the suspension not able to be as low as it was before, you can actually get in there now and be able to tighten this up without any problems, unlike before. And this thing gets torqued down to 100 Newton meters, which is 73 foot-pounds. And the sway bar link, because that's approximately 46 Newton meters, but I'm just going to tighten it up till it's tight. I'm not worried about torquing this one. All right, that's the sway bar link. And now you're gonna repeat that for the other side. Put the wheel on and go for a test ride. And before we're done over here, the setting the droop is the same for the front and the rear. But like I said, all I did over here was I loosened up these 2 spanners so that the spring was loose. Then I tightened this one up, the upper one, until the spring bottomed out and I couldn't push it up anymore. Not too hard, I didn't want to put too much pressure on it, but just so that it wasn't loose in there anymore. So then I raised this one up to touch the bottom of this one. I raised this one up to the point where I can get the spanner, like I said, this, and I can get it in between the 2 of them. And at that point, I tightened this thing up and I locked it up into place. And that gave me 1.5 inches of droop, is what you're supposed to have as far as the minimum. And the thing is, the reason why I know that I can't get any more out of that, because they say if you want more droop, you gotta loosen this up. Well, the thing is, I don't have it very tight to begin with, and it's not very far up, only 4 millimeters, which is not very much. So if I do loosen it, it's not gonna give me very much at all. And I don't wanna risk having not enough preload on the spring. So 1.5 inches is perfectly fine. And then as far as your height adjustment, so when I put these in, I put the extra spacers in there to give it an extra lift. And with this thing adjusted to the bottom of the threads, and with the extra spacers in there, I get my 25.5 inches, which is exactly what I wanted. But if I wanted to lower the car more, I could either take this out, which would really lower the car, or I just raise this up slightly. So you just gotta loosen the top one, raise it up, loosen the bottom one, and raise it up to the amount that you wanna go up. But in order to make it actually happen, you're gonna have to undo the bolt over here for the sway bar link, because that's what's tightening this thing down. So you don't have to take it all the way out, but loosen it enough so that you can end up putting a jack underneath and raising it back up till it bottoms out on these. And then you put some pressure up on it too. Also compress the spring a little bit, tighten that thing back up, and that's how you make your front adjustments. And now let's go for a test drive. Okay, so here we are on a test drive, and I can begin to tell you how it really transformed the car. You know, this everything is so immediate now. The steering, before it was kind of sloppy, it didn't react right away, and now it's so tight that so little movement now is needed in the steering wheel to change direction as opposed to before. And I set this thing up with the damper adjustment on the middle at 15. and out of the 30 total that it has. You know, for driving around normal in town, it's a pretty comfortable ride. I don't find it harsh at all. You know, it's definitely a lot better. I mean, it's definitely a lot better than what I had on here before, which was a factory, you know, struts and shocks, and then with the I-box springs. Every time I hit a bump, it kind of almost felt like the car would like, shake a little bit, a couple times to it. And this is like just like hits a bump, and then that's it. It doesn't feel like there's any other after movement of the car. And so that makes the thing a lot more enjoyable. And even just taking off with the clutch and everything, now my clutch feels different because the whole car doesn't doesn't pitch like it did before. So just the amount of feathering of the clutch, I had to change that a little bit. And I'm just really impressed with the coilovers and how they handle. And if you're definitely thinking about doing a set of coilovers, I would recommend it. You know, do your research. I really like the Feals. I thought they were a pretty good price for what you get. You know, I like the fact that they were made here in the States, so that if I have any problems with them, I can easily get them rebuilt. The warranty was nice and easy to take care of, as opposed to buying something overseas and having to really wait for parts and having other issues. So I was really, I'm really impressed. I'm just all in all, I'm just really impressed with the Feals, the shocks, the struts, and going with the Swift springs. It's definitely been definitely a huge improvement in the car, and I definitely recommend them 100%. So thanks for watching Kevin's European Garage. Thanks for watching me put my coilovers in my Porsche 996 over here. I did have one casualty, unfortunately. My snap-on torque wrench, the head on it snapped. So now I have to replace that, and that was my only torque wrench. But, you know, it is what it is. All right, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and don't forget to ring that notification bell, and I'll see you soon.